Hey guys, so we're going to start with modeling now, and I have this table that I want to make inside of Cinema 4D. And it's a pretty simple table. It's a table that I got off of the IKEA website. You can see the geometry is pretty easy, so it should take us a couple of cubes that we can manipulate in order to turn into this table. I also have some textures that I found that I want to apply to the table. So once the table is built, I can apply these different textures, and this one in particular is probably what I'm going to go with onto the table to give it that authentic feel. So going into Cinema 4D, starting with a blank canvas here, there's nothing on it. I'm going to just start with a cube object. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make the table surface. Now, the way that Cinema 4D operates with the dimensions, and this can be changed in the preferences, is everything is set to centimeters. You know, in US we deal with inches and things like that, but just try to think of centimeters not as centimeters, but just think of them as just as a unit of measure. So, for example, so the size on the x value, let's say that I make this 1,000, and you can see what that does. It stretches on the x-axis, so it's going across this red axis, what the red arrow is. So then what's the depth of it? So the depth of it on the y-axis, going up and down in green, I only want this to be, pretty small, so I'm going to start with 20. That gives it a little of a flat surface. And then the actual depth of it going this way, I should say the width of it going this way, would be the z-plane. So for the z-plane, I'm going to make that, let's try 400, and that will give me the tabletop that I need. And so in that way, you can use whatever measurements in your head and try to figure out the geometry of your object. In this case, it's just a tabletop. I'm going to just move this around just a little bit just to get a look at that and look at the table thickness and see that's a little bit too thick still. So maybe instead of 20, I might make it 10 just to flatten that out a little bit more. And again, just moving around, just seeing what I have here. Now, the table legs, those should be easy too. This should just be cubes. So I'm going to start with one, and then I'm going to duplicate those, and then I could be able to move them around into their locations in the corners of the table. So starting with one cube, and the dimensions on this, let's say that we go with 40, 40, 40 to make it this width. But then I need it to be taller. So which value would make it taller? Well, it would be the y property. So maybe we'll do 150. And that looks about right for a coffee table. That looks about right. The width and the depth of it is a little bit, maybe a little bit too chunky, but we can get a better sense of that. Now here's where we want to go into another view so that we can position this accurately, and then we can make the copies. And another thing that might be helpful is to name these things. So if I'm going to double click on the name of this, I'm going to call this table top, and I'll just call this leg. And once we create the duplicates, you'll see that the names are reflected there. So I want to go into multiple views to see where I am, and I'm going to use this right view to get the position, and I'm also going to use the top view to get the position where I want it to be. So right now you can see the leg is centered in the middle of the table, and I want it to be in the corners, and it's not directly in the corner itself. It's a little tucked in because there are some guards on there. So just using the arrow for the x value and the arrow for the z value, just going to pull that down and in, and you can see what that's doing here. Now, right now the leg is on the top of the table. We don't want it to be on the top of the table. We want it to be on the bottom of the table. So using the right view, I'm just going to click and drag to pull it down into this position. And I can also see how far in that comes in from the corner of the table and what the distance is there. So I'm just going to push it a little bit further to the left to give it a little bit of a hang. Now, so that gives me one leg, and I want to get 4 legs. So to create copies of objects in Cinema 4D, the keyboard shortcut is to hold down the Command key. You can also copy in the property object manager, but I'm just going to do it with in the views themselves. So looking at this top view, I'm going to use this as a guide, and holding down the Command key, notice that you get this icon, and I can click and drag in order to move that leg to where it needs to go. Just roughly estimating its position. And then holding down the Shift key, I'll select both legs, and holding down the Command key, I'll click and drag up in order to create the copies. Okay, so now going into my perspective view, I'm just going to click on that, and then I'm going to rotate around and look at the table. And I can see that the legs aren't really meeting the top of the table, so I want to go ahead and adjust for that. So I'm going to go back into this multi-view, and this time I want to focus on this view, this side view, and I just want to select all 4 legs, and using the guide here, I'm just going to pull those up till they reach the top of the table. And then I'm going to switch back out, look at my perspective view again, and then rotate around, and that looks a lot better. So I got the table pretty much built. There's those side rails that you saw in the photograph. So if we take a look at that image again, you'll see that it has these side rails that are kind of nested inside. They fit inside the leg, and they're underneath the tabletop. So that's the next thing that we need to build. So again, pretty simple, just using cube for that. So I'm going to grab the cube tool again, and I'm going to guess here. So on the X value, the table width was 1000. Each one of the legs posts is like 40, so maybe 850 might do for the width. For the height isn't going to be as big as the legs. The legs were 150, so I might make this 50. And then for the depth on the Z value, we want it to be pretty thin, so maybe 10. So that gives us something that looks like this. And that looks pretty right to me. I'm just going to pull this down, and again, just using this view just as a test. And then I can go into the other views to see what's going on. I don't know why this is doing that. Okay. So I'm going to go into the 4 view again, and I'm going to look at this view in particular. I want to see where all this lines up, and it looks like it's fitting in just about right. Just want to adjust this just a little bit, but it looks pretty good. And now I need a copy of this to go on the other side. So you can see on the top view here, I need a copy that's going to go on the other side. And also I want to make sure that these are inside the legs and not in the middle like they are. So I'm just going to pull that back. Holding down the Command key, click and drag. That's going to give me another copy for that. And now I need to create additional copies that are going to go into these locations here. So if you look at the side view here, the side view shows that there's nothing there right now. I'm just going to adjust this and adjust the other guard. So that should be this one in the object manager. Just going to pull that a little bit. Okay. So if we look at the 3D view, the perspective view, and we rotate around, oops, I'm going to rotate around. You can see what that looks like. So we're getting there. We're getting close. So I want to create the other 2 posts here. So grabbing a cube again, and I'm just going to pull this way. So using the dimensions that I grabbed for this one, so we know that the height is going to be 50, the width is going to be 10, but the length of it is not going to be 850. It's going to be something smaller than that. So let's see, this was 50, this was 10, and for the width, well, we can stay with 200, but we need to rotate this. So I'm going to grab the rotate tool, and using this I can rotate that 90 degrees. I'm looking at the degree angle. As I rotate, I'm going to get it to a 90 degree, and then I'm going to stop. I'm going to switch back to my regular selection tool. Just kind of move this into place, just eyeball it a little bit. And it doesn't look like it's wide enough. So 200 isn't wide enough, maybe make it 250. And that might do it. So going into the 4-up view, I want to go and just make sure I'm looking at this view now. And you can see that's still not wide enough, so 250 doesn't do it, maybe 275. And yeah, that will do it. So then we can move this. It looks like it's a little taller than the other guard. It's a little wider. It's okay if it's going into the legs, that's fine, but I wanted to make sure that the guards were all the same height. So the height on this should be 50. And I think what's happening, I need to go into the right here. Yeah, so the width of this should be 275. There you go. And now I can put that in place. Okay. We need another copy of this on the other side of the table. So looking at this top view, I'm just going to move this in. And then holding down the command key, and slide that over till it gets into position. Okay, so that's all the table components. I probably should name these things, so I'm just going to call these things guard 1, guard 2, guard 3, and guard 4. Now, all of the components are here, but they're still individual objects and they'll just move on their own. So one thing that we can use to tie them all together, to group them all together, is a null object. So if you click on the object selector, there's this object called null. So I'm going to set that into the object panel. And I'm going to select all the elements of the table from the top all the way through. And then I'm going to just nest them inside of the null. You want to wait till the arrow's pointing down. And now the null contains all the objects. I'm going to name the null just by double clicking on it. I'm just going to call this table. And then now if I move things around, you see that the whole table moves in space. So that's how we can control all of the objects together. So in the next video, what we'll do is we'll take a look at how to make textures and apply the textures to the table.